Welcome, Honorable 007. He's the one and only Sean Connery.
Welcome to Japan, Mr. Bond.
Despite a rocky production process, Thunderball proved to be another massive box office hit, further ensuring the ongoing success of the James Bond franchise. Audiences worldwide continue to look forward to the next big adventure of the 00 agent with a license to kill. But as for the agent himself, well, that's a different story. By this point, Sean Connery had grown weary of playing the role that made him famous, due to constantly dealing with press and fans that invaded his privacy, and he wanted to explore other roles in cinema outside of just being Bond. He also didn't get along with the producers, particularly Harry Saltzman, who he had a long-standing feud with on set. He eventually announced to the world that the next James Bond film would be his last, prompting media to speculate that the next Bond film would be the last one altogether. Luckily, Broccoli and Saltzman were not only able to convince Connery to stick around for one more film, but hired a variety of talent in to contribute to it. Lewis Gilbert, coming off the success of his popular film Alfie at the time, was brought in to direct alongside with Lawrence of Arabia cinematographer Freddie Young, and even famed story writer Roald Dahl, who was a close friend of Ian Fleming, was hired to write the script. The producers pulled all the stops to create what would become the biggest Bond film to date, You Only Live Twice.
No matter what the odds, they don't stand a chance against James Bond. Sean Connery, 007. Bond, the world's greatest gentleman agent with a license to kill. And he never misses a chance.
You Only Live Twice is the first film in the series to take place in an Asian setting, in Japan. In spite of events from previous films, Spectre still remains at large throughout the world and carries out their next plot in this location in a really big way. An American NASA spacecraft is snatched while orbiting in space by an unidentified vessel. The United States suspect this vessel to be of Soviet origin, which causes the two powers to butt heads with each other in the middle of the Cold War. The UK, however, suspects another power is at play and believes the vessel has originated from somewhere in Japan. Due to the seriousness of the situation, James Bond is recruited for the mission, but they also need him to investigate without having Spectre breathing down his neck after the events of previous films, as well as prevent him from breathing down someone else's neck for once. As a result, they decide to fake his death in another gotcha moment that for some reason reminds me of the opening of Thunderball. I remember being so confused seeing this as a kid. I thought, there's no way the movie ends that quickly. That would have been pretty disappointing, but apparently joke cuts like this were made all the time by Peter Hunt on the set.
Terence was saying, what you got cut? What, can I see anything? You know, he was anxious. Yeah, I said, we got the scene with M and Q and Bond in the office. Oh, good, let's have a look at it.
Catches like that.
That's right.
And open ordinarily.
Terence fell out of his chair, and he loved it so much. Those are the sort of fun things that we did.
Anyway, the opening is great, and it's made even better by the title theme performed by Nancy Sinatra. She was really nervous when she was recording, and the final cut of the theme was reportedly stitched together from several dozens of takes. Again, this is a true testament to both the talent of the artist for pulling through, and to John Barry for making it work. It has a melancholic melody to it, a very different sound compared to previous themes, which is fitting considering how different the film is from others in terms of its setting. The theme is so good that it was even used in a season finale episode for Mad Men, which ironically seems to be referenced more these days than the original film it came from. After Bond's fake funeral ends with his burial at sea, his body is retrieved by MI6 and he's brought on board a British submarine before meeting with M for the debriefing. Bond is informed about the escalating tension between the Cold War powers and is ordered to investigate the whereabouts of the missing spacecraft in Japan. From there, the rest of the film takes place within several parts of Japan, although some footage was filmed in Spain and Gibraltar. Bond ends up meeting a variety of characters to help create a plan of action for dealing with Spectre on this mission. One of his first interactions is with Henderson, an MI6 operative living in Japan, who doesn't exactly have good taste in vodka.
Oh, that's stirred, not shaken. That was right, wasn't it?
Perfect. Cheers.
Cheers.
Henderson claims to know critical information about the missing spacecraft and how a foreign power is involved in their use, but is killed before he can reveal more information. Bond manages to kill his assassin and disguises himself into his getaway car. This leads to one of the first big action scenes of the film, a kick-ass brawl in an office between Bond and the getaway driver. It might interest you to know the driver is actually played by pro wrestler Peter Maivia, the grandfather of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Lots of stuff gets broken into pieces, just like in the opening of Thunderball, and it's just great to see all this mayhem happening in a small area. Unfortunately, it seems whoever works here also doesn't have very good taste in vodka.
Cheers. Siamese vodka.
Bond ends up finding information that connects the building he was in to Spectre, and from there, the rest of the story develops. He's assisted by members of the Japanese Secret Service, including Aki, one of the 3 Bond girls of the film, and played by Akiko Wakabayashi. She's actually a great character in this film. As with other Bond girls, she doesn't just tag along as arm candy, and does her best to assist Bond in his mission, even saving him on more than one occasion. She has great chemistry with Sean Connery, and it's nice to see them share so much screen time together. Unfortunately, she's killed off about halfway into the film, and she's replaced by Kissy Suzuki, or at least someone who's supposed to be Kissy Suzuki. I am aware she was the lead Bond girl in the original novel, and it makes sense for her to be the same role in the film, but this is lousy. She's introduced in the last half hour of the film, so we have no time to get accommodated to her as a character or see her relationship develop properly with Bond. Aside from this, she's the polar opposite of Aki, tagging along like a puppy dog and frequently getting into trouble she has no business being involved in. I had a hard time believing this was supposed to be the Kissy Suzuki, until I realized that I didn't know who she was to begin with. That's right, nobody even mentions Kissy by name at all in the film. Only in the end credits is her name actually revealed, alongside her actress's name, Mie Hama. The character is so forgettable, not even the other characters can remember who she is. How appropriate. Thankfully, another character assists Bond in his mission and almost makes you forget about Kissy. The other member of the Japanese Secret Service is Tiger Tanaka, played by Tetsuro Tamba. He's basically the main sidekick to Bond in this film, basically being the Robin to his Batman. He even runs his own ninja academy, which we get to see quite a bit of in the film. This guy is a ton of fun to watch. He always has a hearty laugh no matter what situation he's in, kicks ass whenever the opportunity arises, and basically elevates the mood of whatever scene he's involved with. But his views on women are, let's just say, a little dated. It's the 60s, so you can't really pick on it too much. I just find it hilarious to see how blatant the sexism was here, to the point that Tanaka uses hilariously made up words.
I'll just settle for this little old lady here.
Good choice. She's very sexiful.
Sexiful, now that should be a word in the dictionary. The funny thing is that this sort of personality complements Bond's own mannerisms, which makes them the perfect buddy team for this kind of film.
It's the hair on your chest. Japanese men all have beautiful bare skin.
Japanese proverbs say, bird never make nest in bare tree.
Now for the villains. The building that Bond manages to find himself in a few times is run by Mr. Osato, played by Teru Shimada. Osato is the head of a chemical facility in Japan which is secretly smuggling industrial resources for Spectre. He works in conjunction with his secretary Helga Brandt, played by Karen Dorr, making her the last of the 3 Bond girls in this film. The two operate together much in the same way as Emilio Largo and Fiona Volpe did in Thunderball, so it's a bit disappointing to see the same idea being rehashed in this film just a few years after the fact, especially considering how bland these guys are in comparison. Nothing really makes them stand out from previous Bond villains. The only scene I can remember is when Helga captures Bond and attempts to kill him in the dumbest way possible. Yes, even dumber than the spinal traction machine. She tries to torture Bond with a scalpel, and by torture, I mean play around with it for a bit before putting it away and having her way with him. I guess she was familiar with Bond's reputation. Then, all of a sudden, it cuts to a plane where the two are flying in, then Helga traps Bond in his seat and ditches it mid-flight. Why couldn't she try to kill him after doing the deed? At least Volpe did this to a certain extent, but even that was drawn out longer than it should have been. I never understood why bad guys have trouble pulling the trigger mid-conversation. If you're gonna kill someone, don't wait for it, just do it already.
Now I find you in exactly the position that suits me. I had lots of time to learn how to shoot with my left.
When you have to shoot, shoot, don't talk.
Anyway, I got a little carried away there, so let's talk about the real villain of the film, Ernst Stavro Blofeld. The identity of one of the most famous Bond villains was shrouded in mystery throughout much of the series. There were a few glimpses in From Russia with Love and in Thunderball as well, but here, the head honcho is finally revealed, and he doesn't disappoint.
Allow me to introduce myself. I am Ernst Stavro Blofeld. They told me you were assassinated in Hong Kong.
Yes, this is my second life.
You only live twice, Mr. Bond.
His evil plot is to steal US and Soviet space vessels to start a world war in which a secret world power, strongly implied to be China, plans to take over the world in exchange for a hefty payment to Spectre. He's played by Donald Pleasance, who would later become famous for his role as Dr. Loomis in the Halloween slasher series. Funnily enough, he wasn't actually the first choice for the role. Czech actor Jan Werich was originally cast for the role, but director Louis Gilbert decided against it because he wasn't intimidating enough, and even described him as a poor, benevolent Santa Claus. Well, Pleasance is anything but Santa. He has a cold, dry tone in every scene he speaks in, and the scar on his eye is definitely an upgrade from Largo's eye patch. He also manages to stay one step ahead of Bond, always noticing things that fly under everyone else's radars. His mannerisms and appearance in this film are so iconic that they've become tropes in many spy and action films today, and have been parodied in many others, most famously in the Austin Powers series.
What do we have?
Sea bass.
Right.
Alright, now to talk about some of the best things about this film. If there's one thing that it can be commended for, it's the action. Simply put, the action scenes are amazing. There's not one dull moment whenever Bond is involved in a conflict. The car chases, the fist fights, the explosions, it's complete mayhem. One scene that stands out to me above the rest is the Little Nelly gyrocopter fight. The fact that this scene was filmed in 1967 is simply mind-blowing. Bond flies around Japan after being debriefed by Q to investigate the whereabouts of a possible base for the spacecraft, only to get assaulted in midair by Spectre choppers. He uses every trick in the pilot's handbook to take out all of the goons, and it's a real treat to see so many gadgets being used at once to cause so much destruction. It may be a bit hokey, but considering the most used gadget in Thunderball was a rebreather, I'm not complaining. And the final battle in Spectre's hidden base, what can I say? It's a masterpiece in action cinema. The set itself is jaw-dropping to look at. I mean, seriously, Ken Adam really outdid himself with this one. Apparently, the set cost $1 million to make alone and contained more concrete and steelwork than the average Hilton hotel. You can't make something this awesome just with CGI. I mean, a giant space shuttle launch zone hidden inside a volcano? Come on, that's gotta win the award for most badass evil lair in all of film history. Besides the sheer size of it all, the real highlight comes when Bond rescues the astronauts captured by Spectre and starts a full-out war inside the volcano. Tell me this isn't the most awesome thing you see in a spy film. Tanaka's ninja army rappels down the volcano en masse, and they start firing guns and throwing grenades all over the place. bodies fall over railings, they fly all over the screen, they get cut to pieces by ninja swords. This scene blows my mind. It's profoundly entertaining, and to be honest, I think this is my favorite action scene in all of Connery's Bond films. It may not be subtle and sinister as some of Bond's previous interactions with Spectre, but who needs subtlety when you've got this? Boom! Kablam! Oh! The action here is so awesome, some of the cast members can't handle it. Take a look at Blofeld's cat here.
Impregnable? Come with me, Mr. Bond.
Even during the more quiet moments in the film, it still manages to be awe-inspiring, largely due to the scenery. As someone who's been to Japan, I just really like looking at all the backdrops and the imagery. It's one of those films where you can instantly tell which Bond film it is just by looking at it, even if you're only a casual fan of the series. Everything from the city streets of Tokyo to the rural villages, the clothes that people wear, the shrines in the background, there's just a real, distinct visual style to the film that's a feast for the eyes. Of course, Freddie Young's cinematography complements the mise-en-scène extremely well. It's no wonder the man won 3 Academy Awards for his work. His wide shots do a great job of capturing as much of Bond's environment as possible and helps elevate whatever mood is being conveyed, whether it's a slow walk with a friend or a struggle to escape from his enemies. You get to see pretty much every angle of Bond's journey. I can't think of any shot in this film that has any wasted space. Even the scenes that are indoors are memorable, my favorite of which is probably this scene between Bond and Osato's first encounter. It's the only time Osato sort of stands out as a villain, not just because the dialogue is fantastic, but also because of the shots used to show Bond's reflection on his table. It's basically the film's way of saying that Osato's got Bond in the palm of his hand and he sees right through whatever disguise and tricks Bond has up his sleeve. It's one of the few instances in the Bond franchise that uses a creative shot like this to complement the story rather than getting in the way of it, and it pays off brilliantly.
Me? I never take any risks.
You forgive me for saying so, but I think you are taking one now.
I am.
Mm-hmm. You should give up smoking. Cigarettes are very bad for your chest.
Mr. Osato believes in a healthy chest.
Really?
As with all the other Bond films to this point, You Only Live Twice isn't without flaws, though to be honest, they're not really that big of a deal. Sometimes the writing can be weird as far as dialogue is concerned. It's pretty clear Roald Dahl, while a talented writer no doubt, was pretty rough around the edges as far as his screenwriting skills were concerned. Personally, I think he was a little too excited to have 3 Bond girls all in one film, especially when only one of them has any distinguishable personality. But according to a Playboy article written by Dahl himself, the 3 girls were required to be in the film as ordered by Broccoli and Saltzman, so maybe part of the blame falls on them. Honestly, the Bond girls aren't horrible, they're just forgettable, which is a shame because all the other Bond girls beforehand had more or less unique personalities and backstories in order to differentiate themselves from each other. There is one stupid part of the film, but it's more funny to me than anything. In order to investigate the location of Spectre's volcano base, Bond has to go undercover as an honest-to-God, seriously, I wish I was making this up, Japanese fisherman. Top to bottom, head to toe, actual local Japanese fisherman.
Konbanwa.
Konbanwa.
The first time I saw this scene, I didn't get it. I mean, it's not like they did anything to enhance his facial features to any serious degree. He still looks like a Brit, just with a greasy dome of a hairdo. And besides, Bond faces not 1, but 2 assassination attempts, even with his disguise in place. So what exactly was the point of the disguise if he was going to be recognized by Spectre agents anyway? In summary, the whole film is basically operating on autopilot. The story is ordinary, the Bond girls are forgettable, and there's just a sense of normalness to the whole affair. It's pretty evident that the Bond formula had been well established by this point, and that the producers decided to play it safe this time around. But the action and pure entertainment value of it all more than makes up for it. If this truly would have been Sean Connery's last Bond film, I think that last scene in the volcano would have been a hell of a send-off. And the beautiful Japanese scenery and the creativity of the cinematography sprinkled throughout the film does help offset the blandness too. Even though it's not the best of Connery's Bond films, it's definitely not boring to watch. It doesn't drag and pause like Thunderball did in certain places. The pacing of the story is pretty tight for the most part, and can be followed along easily. It's just a shame Connery left the franchise on such bad terms with the producers, because even in his worst films, he's always in his element. Following the release of You Only Live Twice, Connery formally exited the franchise, and the search was on for a new Bond. But that's another story for another day. In the meantime, I encourage you to watch You Only Live Twice. It may not be original, but it's still a lot of fun, and ultimately, that's what movies should be all about. So go ahead and check it out while you can. You only live once. This concludes my review of You Only Live Twice. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, stay tuned for the next part.
You only live twice, or so it seems.